On today's show, we'll be talking about player types and why people play the game and why they play the game the way they do. To help us talk about this and various interactions in the game and how we can be better dealing with conflict in our own situations, we have our friend Tracy. Tracy is a combination baker, wood, and water spirit. Tracy's often better at reading what's in other people's hearts than they are, and we appreciate her insight into the topic of this particular podcast. On today's episode, we have a guest, and her name is Tracy.
Hi, Steve.
And as always, I am Steve, and we also have
Andrew.
And Mark.
Hi, Andrew and Mark.
Andrew and Mark are going to talk about player types, and they're going to turn the tables a little bit on me, and Tracy's here to help protect me, to be my partner on the assault of Andrew and Mark and whatever hell they're going to unleash upon us as players. And so I'm glad you're here to do this with me, Tracy.
It's my pleasure, Steve.
Hooray! So I'm going to turn this over at first to Mark. Talk about player types. Let's hear it. Let's hear about player types. What do you have on player types? Because I've got my own ideas about it, but what do you got?
Whenever I'm thinking about player types, I think about it more through the lens of the MDA, which is the Mechanics, Dynamics, Aesthetic Framework for Game Design. Every GM is a game designer. And essentially what it is it's 8 categories that essentially tell you what kind of fun a game could have. Like the 8 categories of fun. And each player is going to have their favorites and what they want out of it. And so these types are sensation. So that's like the feel of dice. Fantasy, which is just basically wanting to go off into make-believe. Narrative, so that's enjoying the game as a story. Challenge, enjoying the game as a challenge to yourself. Fellowship would be their primary driver for playing the game, and their primary source of fun would generally want to be there because their friends were there. Discovery, so that's exploring the game world and finding out things about that. Expression, so that's where you're using the game as a way to express your own personality and creativity. The last one is called submission. I've also heard of it as abnegation. That is less with a role-playing game, but it is the kind of joy that people get from, say, mining in Minecraft or something. So with those types, we can sort of, every player would generally have a few, maybe say 2 or 3 ones that they've got a preference for, and every GM in their own style will emphasize certain types of fun, certain types of those 8 categories.
So in this particular setup that you're talking about, this is not only a type of GMing and the game that you're playing and what brings you to the game, but a description of what can be an insight to the personality of the player themselves?
So, yeah, basically, each player of those, are you familiar with the languages of love theory?
Mm-hmm.
Where, some people enjoy getting gifts more and some, yeah. So it's like that where, so say that you are a fantasy player. For you, a lot of the motivation is to be in a world of make-believe and ignoring reality and getting out of that. And, then you also enjoy the narrative, say. Well, then, say Andrew's style may focus on fantasy and narrative, which for you would be a really good match, essentially.
And also, as a DM, you have to be aware of what is motivating your players to play so that you can incorporate a little bit of what they're wanting out of a game into your story.
Absolutely.
So you know what they need to feel satisfied with their gameplay experience, and hopefully you can weave that all together if you recognize what each player needs.
Right. It's a hard thing to break down mechanically, and I think the MDA does a really good job of that, to handle sort of a challenging topic, to try and categorize types of fun and what players enjoy.
Andrew, what's your perspective on this? Is it similar to the rabbit hole that Mark's going down, or do you have a different hole altogether?
I don't think that players are any one given type or archetype all the time. I think that there are patterns of behaviors that players will adopt at any given time. So it's difficult to say. If you've got a good story that connects with, somebody's current reading or a favorite movie or book that they have, then you may get someone who is typically more of a dice roller involved in the role-playing aspect, and they sort of leap right into that. It clicks with them. Alternately, if you get a character who is typically a role player, but they may get a new toy as far as maybe a magic item or something, and now they want to be involved in more tactical play. So I think that a player's interests change over time, especially if you're running a long campaign. If you're running a campaign that lasts a year, I think you'll see all the players sort of fall into different kind of archetypes or types of behavior. Some of them obviously can be a little annoying for both the other players and the DM. I think that the broad categories are that you have people who are role players versus people who are chess players, the tactical bits, and then it breaks down that probably into sort of some subcategories from that. What kind of player do you think you are, Steve?
Oh, an annoying one. I mean, yeah, thanks for that laugh, Tracy. The knowing laugh of experience. Ah, yes. I don't mean to be a troublesome player, but I am, and I maybe
Troublesome is not the word, Steve.
You don't think so?
I'm not your DM. I'm another player along on the story, and I like what your style of play brings to the story.
Okay, so if not troublesome, challenging?
You were probably closer when you started with annoying, but go ahead.
Well, if you had to pick 2 or 3 of the types that I listed, what would you say are your motivations for actually playing the game?
My motivations.
Steve loves story. He's good at story.
I love story.
Yeah, I think Steve's actually the DM.
Secretly DMing?
He is. He's a. I don't know if there's an archetype for that. He's sort of the DM. He drives he is the story driver. At least he's hanging onto the rudder for sure.
Now, the problem with that is depending on the group.
Yes, depending on the group.
Like, for instance, the games that Tracy and I've played together, I've been a thorn in GM's sides and someone who makes other players angry.
Because you're committed to living the story that you made for your character, to carrying out the story that you crafted for your character.
That's true.
And, you're not going to let the intentions of your character be waylaid by some other character's intentions. You're going to force a conflict, and not everyone is good at dealing with conflict as you are, Steve, because you're the only empath we got.
So in other words, you would be narrative and expression, mainly. Those would be your forefront ones, perhaps.
And I just love being around
the peeps.
Yeah. At least most of them.
Most of the time.
Most of them most of the time. And some of them all the time. And if it wasn't for the fellowship part, the other two wouldn't matter, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. I see you as a bit of a pot stirrer.
Tracy knows, our friend Brian still holds a death against me in a bar fight. That my first use of Deeper Darkness. Mm-hmm. But it was exactly what the character would do.
Yes.
I'm not a hero yet. I'm not invested in these people.
I'm so excited to GM for you at some point. You're my kind of player.
All right.
I picked that up too. That was going to be a
match.
So for the audience, Mark joined my Wednesday night game, which stars Stephen and 5 of his friends. And Steve sat back, and Mark just sort of assumed Steve's role in the whole bit. It was marvelous.
It was good. Tracy, you would have enjoyed it.
Who do I have to poison to get into this Wednesday night game? I'll wait patiently till someone dies of natural causes.
I would gladly abdicate my seat at the table as an active player.
That would not be as much fun, dude.
I know that, but I'm saying I would do that. Yeah, you would have liked it because as a player, Mark wasn't making any compromises for his actions based on the overarching narrative that he was put in. So when he met with the party who was wanted, for instance, he didn't say, "Oh, I'll help you all. Yay, we're going to join up. It's going to be great." He went, "What's the reward? How much is it? Tell me more." And it was nice. It was nice because, you're not automatically trusting. You're not automatically this integral part of the machine. You're a completely other machine. And, I know that you understand this because, Tracy, your characters are usually so well put together when we meet them.
Yeah, I like to make stories.
Yeah.
And then they know where to go once they get a good story. Yeah.
Right. And as an aside, player to player, have you found that the groups, because I know you've played with a lot of different people in a few groups over the past couple years, do you find that the majority of people that you're interacting with now are okay with you bringing that kind of completeness to the table initially, or do they have to kind of get into that?
Well, when you've got a character who knows what they're going to do, and in any given situation, like you've got you don't have to hem and haw around there. A lot of the cats I've been playing grown-up D&D with kind of appreciate another player who knows what they're going to do and doesn't, from the game mechanics standpoint, hem haw around and flip through spell books and oh geez, I don't know, would I do more damage if I used the axe, or would I do more damage if I threw the freaking tomahawk? No, I don't care what does more damage. If my character has a tomahawk that is part of her character, then she's going to throw the fucking tomahawk. I'm not one of those people who min-maxes and I don't give a crap about that crap. It's all about what the character's motivation is. And so that's cool, And I get my turn done in timely fashion. And then everybody else can just be like, what spell page on Santa's Slavers are there?
Tracy is rather timely.
It's part of my anxiety. I have to make a plan before it's my turn. And I'd be like, okay, here's the spell, here's the page, here's this and that. That's it. Okay, when it's my turn, I got it.
But as well as I do, oftentimes somebody does something that you're like, please don't do that, because I know exactly what I'm going to do. Please don't do that.
Yeah, well, then that's just tough shit, and you got to think something else, Steve.
Right, I know. And then people get mad at me because I'm thinking of something else. They're like, didn't you prepare?
Lysander will never forgive you for turning out the lights on that bar fight. His long and illustrious career of being the best wizard in time, you put the kibosh on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did.
You're never going to live it down, just like you'll never let me forget voting for Ralph Nader.
But I've gotten better about that, haven't I?
Nah, maybe. It's only been 3 months since you called me a Nader traitor, dude.
I know. I may have used the phrase actually getting nadered. However, to get back to Andrew and Mark.
We're getting off topic here. It's called tangents, guys. Yeah, to get back to Andrew and Mark.
With thinking about different character types and how you're thinking about it, and Andrew thinking about it a little bit differently than Mark.
Well, and I think about it totally differently from my perspective as the DM for teenage kids, because most of my players have never played before. And so what they bring to the table is their insight, what they need out of social interaction. It's not even about the game. It's about what they need out of a social interaction. And you've got groups that have to be leaders, and you've got kids that are adamantly followers, and then you've got kids who are scared to be assertive, and then you've got kids who you got to rein in because they're so freaking assertive nobody else can talk. And those are the types of players that I think about. You look at the inner children of your players and what not consciously motivates them, but what subconsciously motivates them, and how you have to manage them as a DM to keep your game moving and keep it fair and let everybody have a chance to play. Because sometimes you'll have a player who won't really be given a lot of stuff. So you got to make a space for them to shine. And maybe if you got a player who just kicks ass left and right and always rolls 20s because they're cheating and you don't know how to call them on it or whatever, like, you got to give them a place to not roll dice and just not win. You got to give everybody a little bit of what they're asking for, I think. And it's not necessarily their character concept, but their inner child, how they want to play, because it's a game and we're all playing. And what do you want to get out of your play? You know?
Quick aside, what I do whenever I actually do this from the start to preclude cheating, is I basically tell everybody, that if you really need to cheat at this game to make yourself feel better, then that's okay.
I don't call kids out for cheating. We're telling a story here. If it's so important to them to make that hit every time, I can give them other obstacles that they can't solve with a die roll.
I just find that if you phrase it that way, then it makes them more aware.
Sure.
That this is a collaborative effort, and so that makes them less likely to do it. Although maybe they will whenever it's really important, which if they do, that's still kind of fine.
Andrew, I'm going to ask you something and then go over to Mark. I know that you are particularly adept at sizing people up and determining personalities. And because of that, being able to adapt yourself to interactions with them. Do you find particular player types, which we haven't exactly defined in a definitive way yet, do you find particular types especially hard to deal with as a DM? And if so, how would someone, maybe use some kind of methodology from your brain to be better custodians of their own game?
I think if I've had problems with a particular player, it's always been my fault as a DM. That it's always when I've sort of imposed my desire on where the game goes, or where I've tried to railroad things through or tried to push in a particular direction. That's when I've had issues as a DM. I've been in games where I was a player and I had another player that was cheating, had a god character. Especially at low levels, it's rough if there's a huge disparity between another character's power and the rest of the party. And if you end up in an encounter where the party is supposed to solve it together and this cheater comes in and sort of steals the solution, or kills the baddie before anybody else gets an attempt to contribute to the problem, those can be, if that continues, that can be problematic for the, why am I here? If this guy's going to solve every problem and he's going to kill every baddie, what's the role of why would my character hang around with this group? Because there's nothing for him to do. There's no way he can contribute. And there's no way for the player to contribute. I haven't experienced that directly as a DM. And I think as I've matured, I've just given up the desire to run the game. I try to set a framework. If they don't do that, we do something else. I just sort of ride. I just try to roll with it. I do want my players to be engaged. And I think what bothers me the most is when I see a player check out, or that I'm worried that they're not having a good time at that session, and it may carry over to the next session, and they just may lose interest and not show up. And of course, that happens too often. You've lost your group, and it's collapsed. I think the best strategy for dealing with troublesome people in life outside of just the game is to never get angry. Don't respond to situations with anger, and just be chill. If you reason through things and don't take it personal, be inquisitive about the situation, address it as a sort of a puzzle, trying to understand what motivated them to say that, and I think that if you see someone get angry, it's a clear signal that they have lost power in this dynamic. The reason people show anger is because they want to regain power over a situation. So they're already signaling to you that they're fearing a loss of power in some way. Give them that. Just back off, chill, listen to what they're saying, and you can often diffuse the emotional piece by involving some kind of calculation or some kind of detailed question that they have to address. So if there's an issue, over a dice roll, and he's angry about that. You just ask, well, how many times did he roll? 3 or 4 times? And in that calculation, you can't puzzle that together in your head and still feel the intensity of the emotion. It will fade, and then you can have a discussion afterwards. But just being chill, that's the bit. That's not to say that at times you don't need to feign aggression and assertiveness to impart the importance of a particular conduct. If you've got, I don't play with kids at the gaming table, so if I've got a kid that's being disruptive, I may need to use my assertive voice and say, don't be throwing dice at the, at your friend there.
Certainly.
And so it's not so much that you're angry, it's just that you need to set a boundary, and you need to be stern in your setting that. It's not coming out of anger, it's just coming out of, hey, I want your attention, stop doing that. And of course, I don't have to deal with that too much with the adult game, just a little.
So now, Mark, you've said before that occasionally you like to provoke tension between your players. Do you find that knowing about the players' personalities and how they approach the game and what type of player, which we still haven't defined a pantheon of those yet, do you find that defining your players by the terms that you listed earlier for how they play or why they want to play, do you find that information of defining your players is useful for manipulating, corralling, GMing for them, interacting with them, getting them through the story as you want? Which usually, based on what you said, is you want them to drive the story.
Yeah. So that is really the goal normally for me, is I want the characters to feel, well, not the characters, I want the players to feel confident enough about what's going on that they will have their own goals and desires and move towards that, and I will be aware of those and plan for it, and that would be the optimal way. Like if I'm having to create story, like I'll create like an overarching thing, but if the players aren't driving enough of the story, that means that I haven't really made them as comfortable as I want them to be with just going at it. And so part of that is that, these characters are going to get into conflicts with each other, and I feel like a lot of DMs will step in and they will try and make that not happen and not have players fighting against other players. And, as long as it doesn't get into a situation where the players themselves are actually angry and fighting with other players, I think it's interesting. It's more plot. Because the players know each other with this, it is some of the more compelling narratives I've seen, and I didn't make it up. As for the player types and how that relates, I think that if you can find out what players are really there for, then you can try and tailor elements of your GMing style to make sure that they get to shine in that particular way that they want to. You have to figure this out for yourself, because people are strangely really bad at knowing exactly why they do things. So you kind of have to...
That was like a nugget of wisdom right there.
So you kind of have to figure it out for yourself, what these players are really after, and then try and tailor it to them.
So what else did you have kicking around in the back of your head about player types? For me, I look at everybody as a set of binaries. There's selfish and altruistic, there's jock nerd, there's vocal, there's non-vocal. And so there are all these binary checkboxes that align in a certain pattern based on usually the person's personality coming in and how their characters are played. Usually you can see how somebody plays a character and get a really good feel for what their personality is. Not who the character is or what class necessarily, but what they do with it and how they interact with the other players. if you had to boil it down to say, I don't know, a handful of archetypes, and I'm sure that other gamers have looked at lists of the type of players before, and I know I have over the years, and I've thought about it myself, and I purposefully did not go and refresh my memory with anything online for myself before this to look at player types, because I was trying to dissect how I thought about it in my brain. As a player, Tracy, can you name what you think are types of players? Like just a few, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't know. However many, could you call them out of your brain immediately?
Well, no, not really, because I think each person runs their character in an individual way. I mean, if I was going to have to name categories of types of players, you could have like you got the rules lawyer, that's a type of player, right? They want to pay attention to what the rules say. They want everybody else to pay attention to what the rules say. And then you've got the story-driven people who are a lot of times like me, is be like, okay, I would like to leap, stab my knife into the sail, fall down, and land on the guy on the deck. What do I have to do that? Or you've got, I don't know, they're just really cautious people who are like, I don't really know what to do. I'm going to wait till everyone else goes, and then maybe I'll hide. So, you've got aggressive players, you've got passive players. I don't think I put them into categories, Steve.
I don't think that you can really get this into categories, which is why I find all those lists really not useful. They're categorizing people in ways that you can't. Like, these are essentially just combination of binaries, as you would put it.
Andrew.
As I kind of alluded to earlier, and it fits the personality thing as well, that people's personalities aren't static. They are dependent on the group they're with, the people they're interacting with, the situation. Your personality is different with your mother than it is with your close friends, your older brother, or one set of friends and another set of friends. You will have a different way of interacting, a different way of seeing the world. I think players do the same. I think that on any given session, you might have a rules lawyer emerge. You probably have somebody who is a little more assertive in general than at other times, but in the right crowd, they'll be assertive. I think that the environment plays a huge role in that. So I think we can still discuss behaviors or clusters of behaviors that occur at the table without assigning them to any one particular player. That there is this sort of cluster of behavior that we recognize as a rule lawyer. There is a cluster of behavior when it occurs that we recognize as a newbie. There is a cluster of behavior that we might recognize as a tactician, and that those behaviors emerge from any player at any given time, but when they emerge, we recognize them, and the group as a whole ends up responding in sort of a different way. There's a different dynamic when that cluster of behaviors emerges at the table.
Definitely very good.
Valid. That's probably the best use of those groups. Speaking of that, and something that you mentioned earlier, Steve, you were saying that, seeing somebody at the table when they're playing a character, you get to know something about them as a person. I think you would have to see me at multiple games, because to get into my character, I actually change my personality every time I'm playing. So, while I was pretty talkative and forceful in that session that we played, sometimes I choose to play a surly person, and that person would be very quiet, and you would see not at all like what you said. I've been accused of being a bad person for the way I played. I asked, so do you mean my character's a bad character, or I'm a bad person for playing that character? And they said, both. So, I kind of change intensely depending on what character I'm playing.
There's a depth to the analysis of how someone acts while they're playing a game that I try to give respect to. And that is, sometimes you can see someone playing a character and they're playing it in a way that the cues of who they are in the silences between the moments that they're role-playing. And I know I'm kind of trying to explain this away.
We love it when you speak in abstractions.
Oh, thanks. Yes, I'm sure you do. But if you're evaluating someone based on their play, I think that you have to look at more than what they're doing while they're actively at the character.
There are times when people will choose a course of action for their character to cause a reaction among the other players. And then they say, well, that's what my character would have done. And, well, there are 5 other players at the table, and none of them are being assholes, and your character has suddenly decided to be an asshole. Why don't we retire that character and bring in a character to the party that's not an asshole?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Now, I was thinking about the Myers-Briggs, in case nobody knows what that is. It's personality type, aggregator, battery of questions. On the Myers-Briggs, I always end up as one of 2. And it's been this way for as long as that damn test has been a part of my life with a therapist or a psychiatrist or whatever else, or just from my own pleasure. I take that damn test. And I'm always either an ENFJ or an INFJ. So they're very similar, except one is more pulled back and one is more forward. And what Andrew was saying, where people have their own personalities that change and ebb and flow and go up and down. And yes, I see that. You act differently around your mother as you do your friends, and you have these patterns of how you act that change based on the situation. But there's also this underlying current that carries you through your existence day to day through all interactions that wave is based on, and that wave overlaps. I feel a little bit differently than I guess maybe the 3 of you, where I see some of these things as very black and white, where I can, oh, this sounds terrible, I can judge people and categorize them and put them in a box. Am I awful?
No. What's my MBTI type then?
Ooh.
Nobody wants to hear that.
It's probably true. It's ISFP. Go ahead.
ISFP, really?
Yeah.
I could see the B.
I think we're polar opposites.
Yeah.
I actually don't,
Yeah.
but I think I'm somewhat polar opposite. I think I am actually. What's the first one? I think I alternate between
Extroverted or introverted?
Yeah, and I'm kind of right in the middle of that. So it's introvert extrovert flips depending on the mood or whatever. I'm right there on the edge.
I think that's true for a lot of people.
Just out of curiosity, Tracy,
INFJ.
you're INFJ?
So I think what we should move to now is us asking you guys about GMs. And what are some things you like about certain GMs and the way they do things? Some things that you thought were really cool that they did. What makes a GM click with you and what they're doing?
Well, McD was a great DM. Like, he ran the game that Steve and I were in together for, 15 years almost? Like, something crazy like that?
Right. Maybe 20.
A long time. I'm getting old. I don't know how old I am. And he was very creative. He made stuff he made these little guys, and then he got this magnet board and made all the little drawings, and he was an art person, and that was really awesome. But he didn't ever really make us feel railroaded by the story, even though he ran a lot of stuff out of books. I have a great deal of respect for DMs that run a story that's whole cloth out of their mind in their game world that they've built from scratch. But in my experience, those guys have a tendency to write the novel before you play it. And you can come up as a player against their idea of how the story should end versus how the story would end if he would just let the characters do their thing. So McD never really did that, even though he ran out of books a lot. And everyone has their own DM style in our current group that I am playing with. Everyone switches around every 6 months or so. So we get a great variety of Dungeon Master styles. And I enjoy them.
What are there any sort of styles that you prefer?
Uh
Or hate?
Well, I hate the railroad story. I hate the idea that the script is already written before you go to the table. And like with a lot of the books and the pre-generated adventures, yeah, sure, the storyline's already written. But if you're presenting that story one way as a good DM, your players don't feel like their destiny is written. They feel like they have a choice. And then when you give that story to them and present it in such a way that they feel like they have to do it, that sucks.
Any opinions, Steve?
Chris he's a hard one to live up to as far as props go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been very, very lucky to have played with 3 particular DMs in this area who are very, very good at what they do in completely different ways. One guy is Billy Sheeter, one is Chris McDowell, and the other one is a guy named Kurt McCoy. And all 3 of them have a very different style of gameplay. I think Kurt could make up adventures on the fly every minute of every day, and you'd never feel like you were on a carousel, always coming back around to the same thing. Billy has a way of making you feel like that your character has a kind of worth, and you have the freedom to do a lot. And probably out of any DM I've ever played with, he handles overpowered characters the best. If you have characters that are high level and can do these amazing, wondrous things, and just with another DM, they would just totally ruin a campaign for the rest of the players, he handles it with a kind of, grace and security that is astonishing at what he can not allow the players to do, yet make them feel like they're allowed to do anything. It's a weird thing that he does. And then Chris, more than any DM I've ever played with, because of his artsy DNA, whether it's papercraft or whether it is clay or drawing on the whiteboard, whatever it is, there is a visual and or tactile element to every game I've played with him that I've just never had anywhere else. And so each one of these people brought something to their DMing that was uniquely theirs. And they weren't trying to necessarily blow anyone's mind. They weren't playing against the players. They were acting in concert with the players like a dancer. And, it's kind of funny. Everybody has a misstep, and a player has a misstep, and the DM has a misstep. But whether it was a pre-made adventure, which Chris, also by McD, Chris is astonishingly good at, or whether it's something completely made up, which is Kurt, or somewhere in between, which is Billy, actually to have those 3 guys kind of run in the same circles in one town is kind of amazing. But they do dance. And so far, especially now, because Andrew and I spent a long time not playing together, it's nice to see Andrew is able to do that dance as well. I don't think that if you have a DM who can't dance with you and who does get mad or who doesn't know how to let the players interact together and what they should figure out on their own before you take some kind of control, it ruins the game for me. Boy, that was a long way to say that I got 3 guys here locally who play differently and I like them.
That's okay.
Well, of those 3, I've only played with McD.
And that if I'm putting McD's there, if I'm putting these other 2 guys up there for different reasons,
they're all also good.
Yeah.
I trust your judgment, Steve.
Yeah. But at this point, I'm letting Andrew and Mark run the show as far as where we go next.
Have you had any experiences with bad DMs? And what did they do
that
were bad?
Oh, The very first Dungeon Master that I had way back at the beginning of time when I was learning to play D&D as a teenager was so mad that my boyfriend invited me to play that game with those guys because I was trying to steal his best friend. And so he had my character raped and I had to set out and have puppies while the other kids adventured on. Now that's a misogynistic DM and he's still running games and playing games in Morgantown, but he's still also a jerk. So don't take your personal problems out on your players, because that's not dope. Bad dude.
Yeah.
And I let him run games for me for 10, 20 years, maybe. Long time.
Sounds horrible.
Yeah. He was awful.
Was?
And I don't name people's names.
Yeah, wow, it's sad that he didn't grow.
Yeah, it's sad. And the thing is, D&D is a big sausage party most of the time, and you guys don't always notice those things happening until you get a chick to play with you. Maybe. I don't know, maybe the whole arc of Dungeons and Dragons should address that.
Yeah, I've usually had women in my games. I've only had maybe one or two that didn't, so I don't think I've experienced that as much, but I'm aware that on a...
And you're also, 15 years younger than me and Steve? At least?
Don't know. I am
Okay.
35.
10. Yeah.
Bingo.
15. Yeah.
Well, 10 for you.
Because I'm so young.
Andrew?
That same dynamic can happen at the table between players, where personal tension between the players is expressed with their characters, or vice versa. A character will do something. I had a game I was playing in locally, and the barbarian had missed a bunch of attacks in combat, and my rogue had gotten a critical and taken the guy out with a single sort of stick. I just had my character say, that's how it's done to the barbarian, because that's, what the little sassy rogue does. And the player, he was much, much younger than I mean, he was, he's in his early 20s, and he did not take it well. He thought that I was, insulting his ability to roll the die, I guess. He thought that I was personally attacking him. He still resents me, I believe. So it's just a very interesting kind of dynamic.
Yeah, I think people have trouble sometimes separating the player from the character. Like with that incident I talked about before, where they said I was both a bad person and a bad character. Eventually, the character that they didn't like disappeared, and I made a different character. And then they were all cool with me again. So, it's not, it depends. But I think a lot of times people get confused. They think that somebody's some way whenever they're just playing a character. And sometimes the characters aren't the characters, and it's the player having it some sort of vendetta or personal issue. So, have you had any particular instance with bad DMs, Steve, that rubbed you the wrong way, and what were the things that they did?
Oh. Well, I don't like to think of people generally as bad DMs.
Well, DMs that made mistakes that rubbed you the wrong way.
Right. Well, I've been lucky because even the people who weren't the best DMs because of experience or technical reasons, even those people, because they were earnest about the game and the players, going on that learning journey with them was acceptable. For me, all the bad comes from personality and choices because of who they are. So I have had GMs in the past. I had one in a BattleTech game way, way back that was an abuser. And I didn't know why this guy treated some of the people in this campaign the way he did. But it seemed wrong from from a player's perspective as the GM, because it was like an abusive parent singling out certain children and taking things out on them, and they never could do anything right, and there were always secret roles, and those people were always at a disadvantage and things like that. And it turned out maybe the third time I was there playing, I heard, we were taking a break, I heard a commotion outside, and this guy is roughing up his girlfriend in the driveway. And I immediately fling open the kitchen door and I start bolting out, and I've got 2 guys holding me back. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? And they're like, it's none of your business. I'm like, bullshit. And of course he heard me because he was right there. So he stopped and I was like, this is bullshit. You know, what's going on? You all are okay with this? And they're like, it's none of your business. I'm like, no. And so that's a very extreme case of where I really wanted to hurt somebody. But
so it sounds like your experiences with bad DMs tend to be them just being bad people, not bad at DMing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy's experience with that first time is like the ultimate version of that kind of...
But sometimes people use their power as the dungeon master to be like tell a story that they want and be powerful. And like maybe people that like to be powerful sometimes like to be dungeon master because they get to be God. And maybe sometimes their baser instincts come out and they don't treat the players like players, more like pawns, you know, like maybe not like a benevolent god, but maybe like a pissed off Greek god or something. You know, like...
I've been in those games.
Yeah. I would like to witness some strife here.
Of course, I think in the early days, a lot of the early days, you know, I would think that perhaps even being in a Gygax game would be somewhat similar to that because, you know, it was not expected to have, you're expected to have 5 or 6 characters, you know, within a couple weeks. They're all going to die from some random horrible event. Mm-hmm. And, don't get too attached to the character. That's evolved a lot, I think, since then.
I think that's fine, of course, if people are upfront about that it's going to be that kind of campaign, you know. This is more about challenge and it's going to be really hard and your characters are going to die. I think that's valid if you're upfront about it.
And that's your intent. And your intent is not this self-aggrandizing bravado and punishment that a lot of people, and it is interesting for me because I do not see exactly the same patterns for teens right now that I see as an adult in Gen X world. And I don't know, Tracy, because you DM for younger people.
Yeah.
Do you see the same kinds of issues in between the players or with DMs that they've had? Am I just looking at it totally wrong, that there has been a change and these things are not as prevalent as they used to be?
I don't think you're all wrong. I think as far as the kids that I've played with, there's a lot less homophobia at the game table than there was when I started playing 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Like, even into my 40s, my gaming table was all dudes and like all of the jerky jokes were like, oh, you're gay or whatever, you know? And there's a lot less of that. Like, nobody, like, our gaming group, Steve, we've always had players who enjoyed taking a different approach and playing cross-gender roles, you know? Like, our best gaming pair, you know, I played a dude and you played a chick, you know?
Exactly.
When the kids don't seem to be worried about that stuff so much. But the things that come out at the gaming table are the same things that come out in any social interaction with kids. And that's like, they want to establish a pecking order. The shy kids want to not be so shy. The brass in your face kids like want to be brassing in your face. And like, that's where, as a dungeon master for younger kids, you got to help them be a team, because all the kids are coming at each other all the time, fighting for dominance. And the game table is not...
That happens at
the grown-up level too?
Yeah, that happens at the adult table too.
Yeah, and they're all fighting for dominance, and what you have to do is get them to understand that in order to win the day, in order to complete this story, everybody's got a part to play, and you've all got to support each other. And you'll always have a kid who has a beef with one other kid and wants to be like, well, I'm going to shoot his dog. And you'd be like, the kids are like, no, you can't shoot the dog. And the one kid's like, I can do whatever I want. It's Dungeons and Dragons. All I have to do is roll the dice and I can shoot the dog. And I'd be like, yeah, you could shoot the dog, but then they're going to want to beat you up because, and you're not being a team player. So you want to roll a new character? Because I'm pretty sure you're either going to end up in jail or in the hospital, You just have to talk them out of it, or let them do it. And then suffer the consequences of their actions because it's a game. So they can do crappy shit to each other in game. And if you talk it out right, they learn something from it. That's the way it is with people, grown-up kids too, but they don't always listen the same way.
Grown-up kids are probably worse about listening.
Yeah, you can't take away their Nintendo privileges.
They're established.
You can't do that.
So, have you guys ever had a game that you just, lost interest in because the DM did things wrong or whatever? Not because they were bad people or did something, crazy, but the campaign was dulled, it wasn't doing what you wanted, and you just kind of lost interest in it?
I've lost interest in games where my fellow players are more interested in texting on their phones or making jokes. I love in-game jokes and I love the banter back and forth. But sometimes if your players aren't respecting the DM and following the story, it can get annoying. And I'm that kid sitting in the back of the class is shut up and listen to the teacher.
And do you think that was more about the DM not kind of keeping control and keeping the story moving, or was it more about the players just not actually wanting to play?
Well, from the perspective of a DM, I would say human beings are very hard to wrangle. And you're going to have to work to get them to play the game. And sometimes they're more difficult than others. And you don't want to, some DMs, I, as a teacher person, can be farts are funny, back to the game. It's your turn over here. What are you going to do? But DMs that are DMs of my peer group don't always do that. And they just sit back and let the shenanigans play out and then try to bring it back when they get a chance. What do you think, Steve?
I check out when I am not engaged. I've only DM'd a few times, and the first time that I ever DM'd was demoing the game Earth Dawn that FASA put out in the early 90s. And Earth Dawn was a very interesting take on fantasy role-playing and the way that they handled magic and damage and things like that, and I loved it. Loved it. So the game store that I was helping out at the time in Tennessee, I said I was going to run a demo game on a Monday night. I had 16 players show up. The good news is I had helped build a 5-foot by 15-foot gaming table that we had used the risers because it used to be a music store. And we built this felt-covered thing because I thought we could use it for wargaming and everything else. And we had in a back room. And I was like, all right, everybody back. And I split them into 3 groups. I had 5, 5, and 6. And I while we were talking, and you all were talking about the GM side, I was thinking about engaging characters and engaging players and thinking about my own experience with meetings and with the employee recognition program that I worked on at my previous job. And when I'm in a meeting and I'm trying to solicit ideas or get conversation going, I'm paying very close attention to the people in the room. And that's why I like to sit in a corner, no matter if I'm running a meeting or I'm participating, because I want to be able to see everyone in some way so that I can judge, I can take their temperature. I would allow other people to talk and then I would, interrupt and I'd zoom in on one person, how do you feel about it? And it really helped those people that weren't as active and in the fore to have someone call on them, because it's not like a class. And if you do it right, they're bringing something to the table and I'm actually interested in what they have to say. And I was thinking about this Earth Dawn game because I did that with these 3 groups. We had touched on in another conversation about how difficult it is sometimes when you split the party. But I remember at that time that even when I was on one group, if there was a pause or something and I saw someone in one of the other 2 groups who was waning, I would interject something back to that group. There's an active participation that a DM has to have in order to make sure that the players don't check out and they don't stay checked out. Andrew, for instance, knows me well enough that if I'm not participating, depending on the situation, I'm not checking out. I'm just letting other people play.
Unless you're looking at the most recent issue of a comic book on your computer.
Or the news.
Uh-huh.
That's true.
That's the worst.
Or the news.
Like a vice presidential debate.
Or a vice presidential debate.
Like a fly on someone's head.
Right.
Fascinating stuff right there.
But I did that because you all were playing. And I was back healing Frank, essentially.
Split the damn party.
Split the party, I know. But it was really cool to see Jimmy and Mark go off on their own. It was a neat dynamic to watch. So, active DMs prevent waning interest.
But active players also prevent waning interest, from my perspective.
That's true.
They do.
So the more general activity going on that's focused on the game, then the more checked in everybody will be. Just try and keep everybody as active as possible. That's my goal. I've kind of been hogging the question time, Andrew. You got any questions?
No, I think we've covered pretty much all of the archetypes that I had in mind, those patterns of behavior that emerge at the table. I think we've covered quite a bit. Tracy, do you have any questions for us?
Oh gosh, I didn't think I'd get to ask you guys any questions. Well, since we're talking about player archetypes, like what do you think what's your player archetype? Like what do you go after when you be a player in the game? Like what's your main goal as a player?
That's pretty straightforward for me. I think every one of my characters is some kind of tactician. And it's not just tactical in the combat role, but also tactical in the social interactions as well, or even the exploratory. So my characters tend to be perhaps too much of a reflection of myself. Maybe I need to tap into some feeling characters. Your
players are the cruise director. They direct the direction of the party.
No, not so much. I don't think that.
Not really.
Not so much in. I'm more thinking about what is the way to solve this. I'm just a problem solver, and the characters I play, typically wizards and rogues, are those utilitarian kind of players. They're not necessarily the best at the combat or whatever, but they are the puzzle solvers, and that's the ones that I play. I probably need to play some more emotionally driven, passionate characters. Get out of my shell.
It's always fun. Mark.
For me, I would say, using my construct here, it would be fantasy, discovery, and expression. So for me, I'm always, every time I play, I make a character that is very unlike myself and try and sort of slip into their skin and just kind of figure out what it feels like to be them in a way, and just lose myself in not being connected to reality at all. There is only the game, and that is to me that's why I love games in general. You know, I'm not a huge fan of reality overall, so I'd much rather be escaping, and that is a lot of the appeal. And also, you're sort of by doing that, you're sort of learning more about other people, and you're learning about yourself and what it's like to, you know, maybe have a different set of circumstances or different personality type even.
So I have a question for the three of you, and this is going back to things that we've already covered. If you have a nugget of advice, and it can be something you've already said, that you want the takeaway to be for someone who is GMing and they're struggling with the players, either the players' interactions with themselves or a troublesome player against the dungeon master, what would be the one piece of advice that you think would help someone struggling in their own game with troublesome personalities? Andrew.
Be dispassionately inquisitive. Don't get caught up into the typical emotional response, especially anger. Avoid anger at all costs, because anger feeds anger. Somebody's upset about something and you respond angrily in response. It ends up being a power struggle in that moment, and it just goes to shit real quick. definitely trying to be calm and inquisitive about what the way they're perceiving the situation, the way they value the outcomes or the potential outcomes. What outcomes do they think would be appropriate and fair, and just be dispassionately inquisitive.
Very good. Mark?
I would say be assertive and active and keep action going. Don't stop for rules and looking at things. Anytime that there's a pause where nothing about the game is happening, the players are going to, for some reason, revert back to reality. So they do that, and your goal is to make that not happen. So keep activity going that is focused on the game. I mean, you can let, jokes go, whatever, but don't let it get distracted, and be assertive about that, and just keep the game on track, and life will get a lot easier for you. You'll probably find that most people are disruptive or otherwise negatively impacting the game whenever they aren't focused on the game. So if you keep them focused, keep everything focused, I think that is the easiest way to avoid problems and stop it before it happens.
And Tracy?
Don't take anything personally. I mean, even if they're being jerks to you just because they can, which kids will do. And so will grown-ups. But don't take it personally, and let the nature of the environment that you've built take its course. You've got somebody who commits a murder in the city streets, the town guard's going to come and arrest you. There are going to be consequences for stupid actions in the game, just like there are consequences for stupid actions in real life. Just let the chips fall where they may, and let the characters, the players, learn that that their actions have consequences. And don't feel bad about it, because they can make up a new guy. If their guy dies, they can make up a new guy. If they get butthurt about it, just tell them not to make such terrible decisions next time.
Oh, okay.
That's my philosophy for life.
It's a game. It's a game. They should just have fun. They should be trying to have fun. If they're not having fun, let them go to a different table. I mean, there's no reason that we have to hurt each other at the game table. And you as the DM are allowed to, at least this is my perspective as the DM of teenagers, you're allowed to tell them to get the out. Like, be cool or get out. Like, they should have had me moderate the presidential debates. I would have told those guys, shut their mouth. Anyway.
Holy crap. And there it was, all the way at the end.
I didn't watch it. I just saw the memes. But I couldn't watch it because they are mean to each other. They're just mean. Like, it was just meanness.
I hear it was extremely painful to watch.
Yeah, I tried. I couldn't do it. Yeah.
I didn't try.
If either of the moderators were a game master, they failed.
Yeah.
They did. And it was an example.
Had at least one highly disruptive player.
Yes.
Yeah, but the thing is, when you get one incorrigible player at the table, then a lot of times the other kids who have a propensity to just be mouthy will just come on and be mouthy. And then you'll have the kids who are like really crushed by the fact that they're disrupting the line, because some kids like function and structure, and they will get hurt because somebody's being rude. They just won't know what to do, and they'll just be quiet. And then the other kids are like, oh, you're going to be rude, I'm going to be rude too. Throw a pencil, fart. Farts are funny. You lost the thread.
No.
Farts are funny.
All right, let me say something about that. Mm-hmm. They can be. Sometimes they are absolutely not funny in the least. But it did, as a side note, it did make me think when Andrew's talking about the, don't answer anger with anger. And it's interesting to see when people are fighting that impulse. And sometimes you have to let something out to relieve the pressure in yourself because you aren't able to tamp it down and eat it and control it, and you have to spit a little back, even if it's a joke.
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all. Not one little bit. I don't agree with that.
I know you don't agree with it. So if you're not trained in it, if you're not trained in that kind of thinking, and someone is assailing you, and you can't get away, and the only two options are start screaming back and getting into that unresolvable cyclical power struggle, or like, the flapper on a steam engine, it and releases the pressure and goes back. What do you do? What do you do if you are so consumed because the player is pushing your buttons?
Do these players have a trauma history that I have in a binder? Because then I could help you a lot more with that. You don't know whether people have a trauma history. You don't know whether humans at the table of the big grown-up game table, you don't know that stuff. You don't know what to look out for.
Yeah, well, fundamentally, for you to respond with anger, you have to add your own interpretation of the event to the equation. You have to be saying, they said this to me, this has this meaning, this means this, and I need to be, and that pisses me off. It's in that interpretation of the event that you have control, and you've just made the wrong choice if it results in anger. If somebody's expressing anger to you, they're already signaling that they're trying to gain control of the situation, that they feel they have lost control. You don't need to respond to anger in that sense. They've already alerted you that you have the power in the situation. You are depriving them of some course of action that they want. Their mere expression of anger tells you that, hey, the world's not complying with my wishes and you're an obstacle in it. That's what they're saying to you. So there's no reason for you to respond with anger. The power's already in your hands. And anger's a recipe for loss. No competitor wins once they've gotten angry. You don't come back from the loss suddenly because you threw a temper tantrum on the court or the field, or the person that got angry wasn't winning to begin with. It's never the winner. It's never the one that's ahead in the competition. And not that D&D should be construed that way, but once anger has come into play, it's a competition now. I want power. That's what the signal is. There's no need for you to play that game.
But anger is a signal that's not only apparent in your brain, but it's apparent in your body. When somebody does something that makes your anger come up, especially in kids and maybe in grown-ups too, like, you don't just think an angry thought, you feel angry. Your blood pressure starts to race, your muscles in your neck get tense, and you are full of physical angry. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of reflection and a lot of understanding of your own triggers to build the tools to respond to that body anger,
right,
and be a good facilitator without getting angry. So, I mean, it's great. You look like you've done the work, right? But not everybody knows there's work to do, and not everybody does the work. And so being angry is a natural thing that happens, and it's okay to get angry. As the DM, as the person in charge, it's great if you know how not to get angry. But if you're going to get angry and you're going to let off a little steam and you're going to be sarcastic and scar them for life because your wit is sharp and, that's how you're going to do it. And then you're going to forgive yourself, and then they're going to forgive you, and you're going to go back to the table, or else you'll have 16 years of feuding. Right, Steve?
There's something there that I was like,
In sales, you're trained to mimic somebody else's body language as long as it isn't anger. That's the only time where you do the opposite with your body language to promote, essentially getting along, which is part of what you're trying to do as a GM. So I guess there's a little tidbit of wisdom is just, even if you feel angry, be aware of your body language and never express that in your body language. It doesn't, like Andrew was saying, it does not lead anywhere good.
And I would argue that with practice, granted, it's not something that happens immediately. And as you said, you have to do the work. But that with practice, if your conditioned response to that kind of behavior, when somebody expresses anger, if your conditioned response is inquisitive, what's triggering this? What are they signaling? That you don't have that response of that physiological response. You've changed your reaction, that your reaction becomes more cognitive.
You're not interpreting the anger as a threat against yourself. You're seeing it as a signal of dis-ease in your person that you're talking to.
Right. And I think the point that perhaps was being missed that I was trying to make is that that's possible. That is a possible condition for you to have. That anger is not something that is foregone. that you are a slave to that emotional response, that with work, that you can condition yourself to have a different emotional response.
Yeah, the Dalai Lama's had to work his entire life to reach his Zen-like state.
Yeah.
I know, and it only took me a few years. I just don't get it.
I know. It's insane.
It's a lot quicker if you ask for the help of the dark powers.
Yeah. No comment.
The black candles and sashes and jars of salt that you have in the closet back there, nobody should see this. If you'd like to ask us a question or get some follow-up information, maybe submit a topic for the show, please email us at rpg.gamemastery@gmail.com. And we'll be back next week for more information to make your games better and to make you a better game master.